you enjoy watercolors and you browse Instagram, you have probably seen an ad for these. I know when I got up this morning and I was just kind of mindlessly scrolling on my phone, I got an ad for this set up here. So these are the Fuumuui watercolors. I have two 24 color sets. I purchased these myself out of pocket. One of them took a really long time to arrive, and the other one just took a couple of weeks. I ordered the first one at a really weird time when the tariffs were just starting to kind of get into place, so I think they got kind of caught up in that. These are watercolor palettes from the company Fuumuui, or Fuumuui. Let me know how to say that down in the comments. And if you are one of my regulars here, first of all, hi, hello, welcome. Thank you so much for coming back. You might remember that I actually reviewed some of their watercolor brushes, and I promised to put them to the full test when I got to their watercolor review. So today is the day. If you missed that video though, don't worry, I will have it linked for you guys down in the description. And now might be a wonderful time to remind you that if you enjoy art supply reviews, if you are curious about watercolors, if you are interested in art tutorials and art classes, make sure that you are subscribed and that you click the bell notification. Even if you think you are a subscriber, YouTube tells me that 80% of you guys are not. So do me a favor and make sure. So let's go ahead and get both of these boxes opened. These both promise to be solid watercolor opaque. See, says it on both sides there. So I'm assuming, and we all know what assuming does, but I'm assuming that these are going to be kind of similar to Gansai style watercolors. These are really, really in there. Really, really, really in there. So it may take some doing because the packaging is definitely to fit the watercolors. Oh my gosh, this one is like crammed in there. There we go. So if you are new here, I am so glad to see you. I am Becca Hillburn. I am a watercolor comic artist and illustrator. I make the watercolor comic 7-inch Kara, which you can read at 7inchkara.com. So I already got to interrupt my spiel here. This set did not have the colors on the back of the packaging. This set does. So they're already a little bit different, and we already get a little more information about this set. So these are watercolor paints. They are made by Zhenshi Taiyang. And here's all the information here. They are made in Nanchang, China. And the email is very official at yourangelo1@hotmail.com. They might want to, they're a legit company. They might want to rethink that name. Go for something a little more official looking. This is the more pastel muted color set. So the colors in this set are red gray 1, red gray 2, red gray 3, brown gray 1, brown gray 2, brown gray 3, green gray 1, green gray 2, green gray 3, etc. We don't seem to get any pigment information in this set. So as I was saying, my comic 7-inch Kara, you can find it at 7inchkara.com and read it as a webcomic if you wish. I have been painting for over 15 years now. I have 2 degrees in art. One of them is a BA in hypermedia, which would be digital art, from the University of New Orleans. And the other would be an MFA in sequential art, which would be comics from SCAD. So I have a lot of experience with a very particular kind of art. When I do watercolor reviews like this, and I have been reviewing watercolors for over 10 years now. In fact, I recently celebrated my 10th year here on YouTube. And before YouTube, I had a cute little blog where I talked about watercolors and alcohol markers as well. So I've been doing this for a really long time. But when I review watercolors, I look at it primarily, but not always entirely, through the lens of a watercolor comic artist, because that's what got me into watercolor. So I think I have something a little bit different to bring to the table in terms of watercolor review. We're going to be looking at flexibility. Can these paint a variety of subjects, not just landscapes? We're going to be looking at how well they handle tiny little faces, how well the colors mix, what does the granulation look like, are there any special effects colors, how quickly do they muddy the water? All kinds of properties like that, because when you're a watercolor comic artist, you have to be able to paint everything from people to animals to places The flowers too, if you can imagine it, it is something that you may have to paint or may choose to paint if you're a watercolor comic artist. So it's a very wide scope, and I expect a lot out of my watercolors. That also means that sometimes I'm going to dislike watercolors that you love, and that doesn't make you any less of an artist, and it doesn't mean I think I'm better than you. It just means we have different use cases and different needs from our watercolors. We can both be valid, and you are very welcome to share your experiences and opinions in the comments below, so long as you can be, you know, like civil, because I'm a human, I'm a person with feelings, and I do read my comments, and I often don't respond because they're either overwhelmingly nice or unfortunately mean. So I do actually read the comments though, so like I do see what you guys say, and I do take inspiration for future videos from your comments. So we can totally disagree, just try to be cool about it, please. This is a respectful, safe, and kind space. So these are packaged very similarly. They are in metal printed tins. This one seems like it has gotten damaged in transit. Metal on the back. This one, the newer of the two, seems to be in better condition. They have a plastic lip around the edge. And I'm just going to go ahead and open this one. They are fairly large too. Inside we have a large mixing surface. Again, mine got kind of dented. I'm gonna see if I can like bend it back out a little bit. And then inside we have our paints, but I am not seeing any pigment information. These are rather interesting. They are sticky to the touch. I think you can actually pry them out and rearrange them if you want. The pans themselves are like, they're like two half pans side by side, but not the way we might think of a full pan, if that makes sense. And like I said, they are sticky, and the liner they come in is fairly flimsy, but it works for this, so I'm not really complaining. Again, though, no pigment information, which is a little disappointing. They have a slight smell to them, and they seem kind of like a Gensai style paint. Maybe something that's using an animal hide glue. That's actually something I talk about a lot here on the channel. I've reviewed a lot of Gensai style watercolors and a lot of Chinese watercolors that are set up like this. So, and I knew that it was going to be like this because, like I said, I've gotten 1,000 ads. So the colors in this set actually vary a little bit more. We have titanium white, Naples yellow, Hansa yellow light, Hansa yellow medium, Hansa yellow deep, pyrrole orange, pyrrole scarlet, pink, magenta, quinacridone magenta, Indian red, light blue, Prussian blue, ultramarine blue, lavender, cobalt violet, chrome green, permanent green light, olive green, cascade green, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, French gray, and lamp black. And these are two greens, and they look like black on the swatch, but you can see the colors here. So what I'm seeing here is even in mass tone, you can see all of the colors. So that makes me wonder if there's been if these are meant to be, these are opaque watercolors, so they are probably meant to be handled more thickly. Next is our more gray set of colors. These are very different, and I don't really understand why. So the other one had other than they were just manufactured at different times. The other set had like a plastic protective swatch sheet on top of the watercolors. This has a swatch it yourself swatch sheet. And then we also have finally a little information about these. Colloid selection, made with premium gum arabic specifically chosen for semi-solid and opaque watercolors. Each pigment is formulated to achieve ideal consistency and adhesion, ensuring smooth application and excellent coverage. Powder selection, carefully selected high quality pigments, but they didn't give us the pigments, y'all, are evaluated for light fastness, weather resistance, sun resistance, alkali resistance, and opacity, delivering rich, vibrant colors that maintain their brilliance in both wet and dry techniques. Grinding and filling. Each color undergoes multiple grinding cycles with pigments blended over 2 months for maximum uniformity. A multi-stage filling process ensures a consistent, thick, semi-solid texture, allowing precise control and easy mixing. Ultimate purity. Produced using highly pure pigments without fillers. Okay, when you claim you're using good pigments, tell us what your pigments are. Produced using highly pure pigments without fillers or additives that could compromise color or coverage. These pigments maintain their opacity and vibrancy, ensuring true color performance and no unwanted graying or shifts. So this is the 24 color semi-solid opaque watercolor set. The main ink, okay, they are for beginners and advanced painters. That's a pretty wide gamut. They are useful for painting indoors or sketching outside. The main ingredients are gum arabic, high-grade color powder, dextrin. Okay, that's why they're sticky. There's a sugar in there, and that's going to make them more hydrophilic, water, etc. And these are going to be good for about 12 months. So I'm glad I got to them when I did. Or, I'm sorry, I lied. Not 12. I misread, really. Not 12 months, 24 months. And then we're still dealing with YouAreAngela1@hotmail.com. And, these have a multi-stage filling process, ensures a consistent, thick, semi-solid texture, allowing price control and easy mixing. So I feel like these are probably going to be a pan style gouache. Maybe that's what we're looking at. Like I said, there's a little warping in my two sets. Okay, so when it comes to watercolors from China, I always have like some considerations in mind. Do I want to test them like I would Western style watercolors? So like I would Paul Rubens, which is a Chinese watercolor, but it's formulated to handle like Western style watercolors. Or do I want to kind of look at them like I might Chinese watercolors? So like Marie's watercolors. And even when I do that, I am not a Chinese watercolor painter. I don't have access to classes on that. I have some books, but I am not by any means an expert. So typically I will swatch them on like a ripe Xuan paper. I might do an Etegami postcard, which I know is Japanese, but leans a little more similarly, would help us see the properties of these paints a little more fairly. And then I might also swatch them on my Blick cotton paper, and then do a Western style or an illustration style field test. So that's sort of the direction I'm leaning today. I think with these though, in order to kind of get an idea for what we're dealing with, we're just going to have to swatch them and then kind of go from there. So I'm going to start with ripe Xuan. I am going to start with the more traditional color set. This is also the set that I bought first. And I am going to be using one of the Fuumuui watercolor brushes. I am not going to spray pre-activate these because they are so sticky. I think they will turn soupy if I do that. So I think it's just time to dive in and go ahead and start swatching these. Since these contain dextrin and were already pretty sticky, I didn't pre-activate them because I was assuming that they might turn to soup if I did that. These activate readily and they have pretty good color payoff. They offer decent bright primary colors. It feels similar to Gensai style watercolors and maybe like a step up from Prang watercolors. So recently I did an art supply redemption with Prang where I painted an illustration. So the colors kind of feel like that palette where they're like very bright, very punchy, very immediate. And that makes sense. This is their saturated color set. I have since found out that they have an earth color set, and I probably would have been better served just given my personal taste with that palette. But that palette wasn't available when I purchased this palette and the grays palette. So unfortunately, we're working with this. But it's the sort of like bright, appealing primary colors that are popular for florals, but are a little bit harder for me to use because the colors are so punchy. The gray set was purchased first, and it was bought kind of on a whim. Part of it is I know y'all just love muted color sets, and I wanted to see how this might compare to the Daiso watercolors. These remind me of wall paint swatches. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just kind of a weird random thought. It's like all those like soft grayed pastels. So these have had a chance to dry. We're seeing a little bit of cauliflowering. That isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just something I'm noticing. So I want to swap this out real quick and do the card that came with the gray set first. And then we can move on to swatching all of them on Blick cotton red paper. The colors in this set are really pretty and they're quite muted. If you bought the Daiso colors hoping for this effect, this palette is going to be a better fit for that. And it's very easy to pick up color quickly. And there's also like this little shelf where if you pick up too much color, you can kind of like squeegee your brush off onto it and it'll just go back into the pan and eventually dry out. I do think these might be paints that would have problems with molding though. Due to the inclusion of dextrin, it's just not as stable. This is such a large palette that it's actually kind of hard to record everything on my desk. I only have so much room. We're going to start with the brighter of the two palettes and then we'll move on over to the gray. So I am going to be looking at opacity. I'm also going to be doing some color washouts to see if the colors themselves stand up to that. I haven't yet decided if I want to try color mixing with these because I think the way they're formulated, that's not really what they're designed to do. I know for Gensai watercolors, that's not really what Gensai watercolors are designed to do either. So we'll kind of play it by ear and see. I definitely don't really plan on mixing the gray set though, unless I needed to get like an interim tone between two different shades because I feel like that's really going to fall apart. So these are supposed to be very opaque watercolors, so I'm definitely looking for opacity, but I'm also looking at how these wash out. Unsurprisingly, these pollute water very quickly. Most of these colors are fairly opaque, but a couple of the greens have very little coverage and are kind of weak. These are also, as I mentioned a few times, kind of sticky. There was no marketing material with these, and the ads don't really explain much. What exactly are these paints designed to do? Both sets are pretty thick, neither flood the wash, but I'm also not seeing a whole lot of granulation. These could either be very finely milled or dye-based. Naturally, the gray set carries more opacity to it, so much in fact that I decided I wanted to try swatching this on a black paper to see how well they stand up. Here's my little Stonehenge Aqua black book. So it's black cotton rag watercolor paper. And you guys can see on black paper, these have a lot of opacity to them. They have a lot of coverage here. These are almost like handling a gouache in a watercolor palette form. Honestly, I probably like the gray set better than the saturated color set. So I'm still waiting on some of the gray tones to dry. I also tried swatching these on some black paper and I'm really impressed by the amount of opacity that these have. Of course, these are still drying. So while these are drying, I'm going to switch back over to the brightly colored ones and attempt some color mixing. I don't really think these are designed for color mixing, but since I do color mixing in all of my watercolor reviews, I felt like it wouldn't be really very complete unless I attempted that. So we're going to be doing two types of color mixing. We're going to be doing optical and we're going to be doing atomic. I have a feeling that the optical will be less successful because these are such, well, these are such opaque paints. These are not as opaque as I thought, but we will see. I want to try them out. That's how we know things. And then I may decide to do a wet into wet test with the brightly colored ones. Because the gray tone ones have just so much white mixed in, I just don't see there's any point in doing that. It's going to make mud. And believe it or not, I don't just review watercolors to watch them fail and then make fun of them. I do want them to succeed because it does get kind of expensive. So I want it to be stuff that I can use in later projects or bring to my classes when I'm teaching classes, you know? I want it to be something worthwhile. So with color mixing, I was able to mix some decent secondary colors, although I noticed that the range for neutrals is rather limited and most of these colors have no real granulation. The pinks and purples worry me a bit because they are just so bright and saturated. The neutrals feel like they are dye-based and a bit strange. For example, the yellow ochre looks more like a quin gold. Some of the colors are so bright that they feel fluorescent, like the orange, and all of this makes me wonder how light fast these colors actually are. We weren't given any pigments or light fast scale to go by. So I set up my optical test to let it dry. And for color mixing, I'm using the lid of the palette to go ahead and mix the colors. Since it's a metal lid with a white enamel coating, it makes it really easy to mix colors like this. The optical blending went better than I expected in that you can optically blend, like you can glaze on top of each other, but I'm keeping in mind that these are sold as opaque watercolors and are probably not designed for a whole lot of layering and glazing. Is what our gray colors look like after they've dried. You can kind of see in areas where it's more thick, you get more opacity. Where there is maybe too much water on the brush, you don't get as much. So you could actually build up kind of like ghostly images on black paper using the gray set. I was able to mix some secondary colors. They are fairly saturated, but I still think this set is mostly designed for you to use the colors as they are, although we do have a nice big mixing area over at the top of the lid. And then in terms of optical blending, we are actually able to get some decent mixes with some of the colors, some glazing, although I will still caveat that given that these are meant to be opaque watercolors, you probably can't just delicately build up a piece, but then again, you guys know me, and you know that I'm probably going to try to do just that with these. So, do I ever learn? Probably not. So, the next thing I want to do is I want to do a wet into wet test with these. I am going to use my Paul Rubens sketchbook because I like how assertive the paper is. Just to show you guys, I have actually done some watercolor field tests and I like this paper a lot. So I'm just going because it's a handy format that's easy to use, and I did need some cotton rag paper to do my wet into wet test on. So that is why I'm going with this for now. I'm also going to continue my theme of using Fuumuui brushes for this review. So I'm going to use this large flat to apply clean filtered water to my paper here. And then I'm going to use, ooh, why are you filthy? That's probably on me. I thought I cleaned that better than I had. I'm going to use this wide flat to apply an even wash of water. And then using a round, I'm going to dab in color. And we're just going to see how these paints react. These paints get really soupy if water is left on them, so it's kind of important to let them dry out between projects. Even just testing like this, they started to get soupy. So color control can be challenging when they start to get soupy. I'm hoping the assertive texture on Paul Rubens' Cotton Sketchbook will force some granulation or at least some interesting effects. It will also be interesting to see what colors we basically lose in the wash versus what we keep. Our wet into wet test has dried, and we can at least see some granulation, at least with like the ultramarine blue. But I do have some concerns about some of these greens and some of these pinks. These colors really do feel like they're potentially very dye-based. And the reason dye-based concerns me is because dye-based tends to be very fugitive, and it doesn't quite handle to me the way some pigment watercolors would handle in terms of like layering and color mixing and being able to build up color. I find that sometimes brands that lean very heavily on dyes mordant out onto something, those colors mix very weak and tend to perform very poorly in the field test, which we will find out. We will get there. But first, I want to do a head-to-head comparison. So we were talking about these being similar to some other products. We are going to start with the brightly colored ones, but I also want to swatch this brand, including the grayscale ones, against the Boko Undo Japanese colors, against the Kuretake Gansaitambi Art Nouveau colors, and also against the spring palette. So that would be, I think, 36 colors that those would be swatched against. My math might not be mathin'. I also want to compare them against the Paul Rubens Gucci Eye pans, as well as the Marie's pans. So we're actually going to be swatching these against 4 other brands. So we have a lot of swatching ahead of us. That said, having all of these watercolors on hand, being able to give you guys comparative swatches like this, especially when pretty much everything shown here was purchased out of pocket by me. In fact, everything shown here was purchased out of pocket by me. It gets really expensive. So if you enjoyed these kind of reviews, if you find these kind of comparisons helpful, useful, and informative, one of the ways that you can help ensure that I can continue to do them is by joining me over on Patreon. You can find me at patreon.com/nattosoup. So for $2 a month, you will get early access to reviews and videos like this, sometimes months ahead of time. You will also get backer exclusive access to the materials that I create for my in-person classes, including printables, templates, and presentations. You will get printable line arts, the kind that I create just for my own pleasure, like my Little Artist series or my Lilliputian Living series, as well as liners that I create specifically for field tests that I share here on the channel that you can print out and color at your own leisure. And you're also supporting the work that I do here on the channel because I see no outside sponsorship. In general, most companies do not send me their products to talk about. I have to ferret them out and buy them myself. And the way I do that is with funds that I have generated from teaching art classes, as well as with Patreon. Another way that you can help support the work that I'm doing here is if you like my art, you could purchase my comic or an art print from my shop at natosoup.com/shop. And then finally, a very important way that you can support without spending a dime is leaving a like, leaving a comment, and sharing this video in an online community or an in-person community that you think will find it helpful. Whether it's Reddit or Facebook, you sharing my videos means a lot to me and it helps this channel grow. I always greatly appreciate it when you take the time to do so. I'm so conflicted on these paints. They're both kind of okay, but they're also kind of weird. I can't quite put my finger on what it is that I don't really like about these paints, other than how soupy they get and how strange the colors are. And yes, this is a highly saturated palette, and yes, they are highly saturated, and maybe the palette is just not a good fit for me. These are definitely not worth ordering from China or directly from the site. They're actually quite expensive for the quality of paints that they are. I ran out of room, so I had to crunch with these. These get so soupy and you end up picking up and wasting so much paint. I'm really trying to give them a chance to dry out in between tests. And why do these need to contain dextrin? I feel like that contributes to molding. There's so many good kind of mold prohibitive binders on the market. I'm not really understanding dextrin other than it's kind of cheap. I figured you guys would want to see a comparison against the Art Nouveau colors. I'm sorry, I'm kind of off screen for this. This one's a harder shot to frame up for me. It seems like you get a lot more paint with these Gensai style pans. These activate very quickly. I didn't really pre-activate them. Some of the colors are similar to the gray set, like some of the pinks, purples, and blues in the Art Nouveau set. And I'm trying not to be biased, but I like the Gensai Tambi better, especially when compared to the bright colors, and I know the prices are pretty comparable. Speaking of bright colors, I also wanted to swatch the spring set for you guys since it has some of those really bright, poppy, spring, almost fluorescent colors, and I just like how Kuretake handled that better. Next up is the Boku Undo Japanese colors. So I actually started the review for these the same day I started this Fuumuui review, and these are way less soupy and prone to gooping up despite similar painting conditions. These are easier to handle so far. Also, this review is already available to patrons at the time of editing and recording. If you guys are curious about it, I like this palette a whole lot better. This review, I pulled out my Paul Rubens Gucci Eye pans. These have sat for about a year and I didn't pre-activate them, so they do take a little bit longer to wake up, but once they wake up, they're pretty saturated. I do wish I'd given these a little bit more time to wake up so that you guys could see why I like them. I do have a full review with a field test, and I'm going to link that in the description for you guys if you're curious about these paints. This set doesn't get as soupy as fast as some of them do, and it could probably benefit from a spritz to activate it, but it has a nice color selection and some really good neutrals. If you're looking for a Chinese alternative to Genzai Tambi, this would be the set that I would recommend for that. Speaking of Chinese large pan watercolors, I also pulled out these Maries. These kind of remind me of the Light Wish Gensai style watercolors that I reviewed a while back. And I'm not just pulling out bad stuff, I'm pulling out good and comparable and popular stuff to give you guys a basis for comparison. Believe me, I have way worse that I could pull out. These activate quickly, but I was swatching this set just a few days ago in terms of like when this review was recorded, because I'm working on a review for these Maries as well. See, another reason to subscribe if you're curious about these kind of things. I like the way the saturated colors in the Maries and Gucci sets handle better than how they handle in the Fuumuui set, but this could just be personal preference on my part. Here's all our swatches neatly lined up on our Blick cotton rag paper, starting with Fuumuui and then Kuretake, so that you guys can see. I know they're kind of narrow. Then the Boko Undo, then the Paul Rubens Gucci, and then finally the Maries. That was a whole lot of swatching. So over here we have the Fuumuui watercolors, including the gray tones down here at the bottom. I kind of ran out of room. Then we have the Kuretake Art Nouveau, and then the spring colors. So I think Art Nouveau ends right around here with spring beginning over here. Then we have the Boko Undo Japanesque colors way up here. The PR or Paul Rubens Gucci watercolors here. They took a while to wake up. I should have pre-activated them because they've been kind of just hanging out for about a year and they got kind of dry. And then we have Marie's, and this is actually a review I'm concurrently working on while I'm working on this in the Boko Undo. I usually will like do the swatching part, bam, 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 and then work on the field test, if that gives you guys an idea. So it's kind of weird because when I was working on the Marie's, I wasn't really liking the Marie's, but compared to the Fuumuui, I think I like how these colors handle. They're not as opaque. The Fuumuui is meant to be more opaque, I think, but there's some colors in the Fuumuui set that are really kind of concerning to me, and I think they might be more light fugitive than some of the others, and I'm also kind of concerned about how they would handle in a field test situation. Unfortunately, the only way we can really find that out is by putting it to the field test. This gray palette kind of reminds me of Claire Therese Gray's work, so I wanted to play around with pieces inspired by her work. I mostly wanted to play around with the all gray palette first to get a feel for it, and because I feel like this palette is rather unique and many of you guys are going to be inspired by it. I also wanted to do something that took advantage of using these colors at a fairly strong mix. So I'm doing a little pansy illustration on these pre-cut out like paper doilies that I bought off of AliExpress a while back. They've been kind of sitting in my hoard, so I wanted to go ahead and use them. So the colors in this set are pretty but repetitive. These are colors that I do struggle to mix, but I don't think we need 3 strengths of each color. A good white or a mixing gray might allow us to mix these colors lighter and might allow for more variety in color. That said, they have a lovely milky consistency and do work well as a panned gouache, and I know a lot of y'all will love the colors in this set. This is also the set that's available on Amazon if you want easier access to it, just FYI. Originally, I thought I would do an insect illustration with the bright color set, and I still may, but I want to create something that uses both sets that has cottagecore vibes, so that's the direction I'm going to explore first. Well, that was my notes at the time of working on this field test. In the end, I never did use both sets together, partially because they just take up so much room on my desk. It would be hard for me to have both of them out and recording at the same time. If you have a larger workspace where you can kind of spread out, that might be more of an option to lean into. I also wanted to do something a little bit looser and freer, so I'm kind of freehanding a floral bookmark just as a chance to try out all the different colors. And also to see how well these work in different strengths and to see how well they work kind of as a gouache. There is some decent variation between the individual colors, but I definitely stand by I would have liked even more gray colors in this set, if this makes sense, instead of like 3 tones for each color. Colors in this palette were so pretty that I decided I wanted to test out some of the Fuumuui. I think these are supposedly their sable brushes, and I have a full review of these brushes if you're curious about them, but they're like for smaller painting. And I wanted to try painting some paper mache eggs. These carry a good amount of opacity and they're fun on darker surfaces. They can be used like gouache. The real issue with these eggs is the brushes that I'm using. These brushes are terrible. Watch the full review before you buy them, please, and not the paints. They can also be watered down for wet into wet techniques. These dry a lot darker and less saturated than when you put them on, kind of like gouache, but that is something to keep in mind, that you're going to lose a lot of that color and you're mostly going to be left with gray. And while I realize this is a gray set, I would have liked more pastel and more color to it, but that's also just kind of my personal preference and probably one of the reasons I prefer the Boku Undo set over this set. So I did about a half dozen eggs, and I wanted to try a variety of different techniques since I was painting on paper and not eggshell. So I wanted to try some blended techniques and some drippy techniques and some wet into wet techniques and some creating a background techniques, just like a variety of things. But I really cannot recommend this set of brushes. They are very dry. They don't hold a lot of paint. They don't want to make marks properly. They're not fun to paint with. I'll try to remember to link it in the description for you guys if you guys are curious about it. You can also paint on top of previous layers, which should sound like a duh, but it's always a good thing to discover, right? It's bad when you try to paint over it and the prior layer reactivates, or there's just no coverage with your subsequent layers. These do really work nicely as a panned gouache that allows some flexibility for how you handle the paint, and they definitely have enough coverage that you can do this sort of light over dark painting. So not shown, after these fully dried, I actually did an ink layer on top of them to just kind of clean up some of the designs and make it a little easier to tell which flowers I'm painting, particularly necessary in the case of the hydrangea there. I'm not really sure who this bright set is meant for. It's kind of weird that there isn't a cool blue in this set. This palette does carry some opacity to it, but the color selection feels almost juvenile, like similar to Praying or Crayola, and not necessarily selected for mixability. I am still playing around with these, as you guys can see, and I'm planning on doing the kind of field test I normally do that has a person in it, so painting a person kind of field test, but I'm hesitant because I'm really not sure how well these will mix. I wanted to try these for loose florals just to kind of see how they handle, and I was honestly not really thrilled with the color selection in terms of the greens. It just wasn't really able to do what I wanted it to do. Now, again, this is partially on me. This was the saturated set, but at the time of purchase, Fuumuui, for this style of watercolor, they did have pan watercolors as well. They only had the gray set and this set available, and I didn't see that they had an earth tone set, which was really much more to how I like to use colors. I didn't see that until I was going back and collecting information for this review. So I think that was either listed on the site later or introduced later, and that's the direction I would have gone instead of this palette. So I know I'm harping on the colors a lot, and I feel a little bit guilty about that, but this set wasn't available when the earth set wasn't available when I was purchasing these. So I definitely wanted to try doing Etegami with these. So I've been obsessed with irises during March and April because that's the season when they bloom. So I'm doing an iris illustration on some Etegami postcard paper. If you're interested in learning how to draw and paint flowers, or you're interested in learning more about Etegami, I have a huge series of flower drawing and painting tutorials for Etegami postcards here on the channel. I may even do a walkthrough on this iris if you guys happen to be curious about it. So for the background on this postcard, I'm doing like a 3-color mix, trying to get kind of like a soft focus background, right? Like, I don't know, some sky, some greenery, some yellow foliage, that sort of thing. The green has some interesting granulation on this textured Etegami paper. The colors do blend and mix nicely, and there's some pretty granulation to the light blue as well. And while I was working with these, I felt like this performed better than I expected with Etegami. I'm reconsidering doing the field test again, but I'm a little worried that these paints may end up turning and ruining the paper, like with what happens with Praying watercolors after a while. And I found that out because I went digging through one of my drawers and I saw that the binder in Praying just like completely loses its oomph and all the colors shift after a while. I'm concerned with how bright these colors are, and the neutrals are kind of weird, but I guess if I ruin it, I could always redo the line art later on. I felt for floral painting, these were actually fine. The brightness of the colors really worked in their favor, and on this paper, they mixed decently well. I didn't have any issues or anything that made me really concerned about it, so I'm still not really sure who these paints are developed for. For all I know, these are a children's grade paint, and it just wasn't marketed as such, but they seem to work all right for Etegami style painting. I did decide to commit to painting a person for the field test. This is kind of in the same style that I did for the Gucci Eye paints and for the Maurice paints. I've decided that I want to field test all my Gensai / Gucci Eye / large pan paints like this by drawing little people interacting with insects. Yeah, I'm really weird. I'm actually really afraid of insects, and I'm trying to get over that by drawing them more. That's helped me get over a couple of different phobias. So why not? They share the planet with us, and I never go out of my way to kill them. So I'd like to be on a friendlier relationship with insects, though I don't see myself ever having pet insects. But the featured insect here is the ubiquitous Louisiana love bug, the bane of our springs and our summers because they get everywhere and they die everywhere. So I started out by doing a poured background using pink, the warm light blue, a cool blue, and yellow. This is on Arches cotton rag watercolor paper. It has been pre-stretched and it was inked with a Sakura Pigma FB. I have shared the line art over on my Patreon. If any of you guys are also trying to get over a bug phobia, or maybe you like bugs and you want to paint along, you are welcome to print it out on the paper of your choice and paint or color along. So I also wanted to utilize that super light Xuan brilliant skin tone. So I'm mixing that with a little bit of Indian red to make a more realistic skin tone. There really isn't a good red for skin tones in this set, so I mixed something kind of custom for that. Now, I'm used to doing custom color mixing. I have a mega palette that I use for my bigger illustrations, but I'm really quite comfortable working with a 12 color set. So color mixing in and of itself isn't really a problem. It's more like I want to be able to look at my palette and kind of see how to get from point A to point B with color mixing. And some of the paints in this palette just really made that a challenge. But like for the skin tone shadow here, that ended up a lot warmer and a lot more fluorescent than what I would really want to use for a skin tone shadow. Again, this is on me though. This is the highly saturated set, and it's probably not really designed for what I'm trying to use it for. I also wanted to give her black hair. And I never just want to go like straight in with black, but it was a little bit harder for me to kind of mix the more complicated black that I like to use for hair. I think I mixed some of the brown and some indigo and a little bit of the black to kind of get that undercolor there. I'm pretty concerned about light fugitivity with these, especially the reds. That was one of the reasons I didn't necessarily want to do a field test that would take a while or might be used in a series of things, because it's really disheartening to paint something and then have the glycerin go off or the colors transmute into something ugly or the paints literally flake off the paper. That's one of the reasons I actually do these reviews, is because it's really disheartening to do that and think you painted something you like only for you to go back to it 3 months later and it looked like hot garbage. So that's where reviews can be helpful, is helping you invest in things that will stand up to the test of time a little bit better. And I think these are so full of dextrin. I can just see like cockroaches or ants eating the sugar off the paper. Maybe I'm worrying too much. That hasn't really been a problem with honey-based watercolor paints. Of course, you do want to like store your work carefully. And I could definitely see that if your stuff ended up in a shed, let's say after a hurricane, it doesn't matter what you painted with. The rats and the insects are gonna eat it anyway. So I decided to go with that kind of hyacinth blue for the dress, since it was used in the background, but it wasn't super visible. I'm also trying to do some underpainting to add some depth to these colors because they feel really flat to me. And part of that is there's just like no granulation. Everything is milled kind of to the same level. So these were pretty expensive on their website, but they're around $44, which I know is not hugely expensive, but it's kind of expensive for how these handle, because these handle like way cheaper paints. I think I like regular Gensai and the PR Gucci Eye paints better than these. I think I took so long field testing because I wanted these paints to prove me wrong, and I wanted to give myself an opportunity to figure out how to use them in a way that I could be happy with. But in the end, I think they're just not worth the price. So rather than the gray set, which I know is a very tempting set, I would recommend the Boko Undo Japanesque set. And rather than the highly saturated set, I would recommend Kuratake's Gensai Tambi paints. So just for context, on Amazon, the 24 color gray painting set is $42.99. The high saturation set is not available on Amazon, but it is available on their site, and it is also $42.99. And on the Fuumuui website, I'm seeing a few products that are pretty common on AliExpress and are very popular to white label, including a paint palette that's Superior used to manufacture. So I kind of wonder if Fuumuui is a rebrand or a remarket of Superior, or if they're just kind of, these are like common molds that are used amongst different manufacturers. They have several Superior products, it looks like to me, including the fan palette and the watch palette that I reviewed here on the channel a while back. The earthy palette set, which I didn't see originally when I was buying these, seems like it would have been a better fit for me than the high saturation set that I bought. And I wasn't really satisfied with this palette for the field test. I mean, yes, I did paint something and that was my goal, and it did turn out kind of cute, but it didn't really match what I had in mind. And it was kind of a struggle for me to get the colors to do what I wanted them to do. It wasn't a horrible painting experience. It's just that there's just so many paints out there that do what I want them to do better than these do, that I really can't see myself grabbing these other than for comparison swatches. But maybe I have used these entirely wrong. Maybe I have totally missed the point of how these paints are supposed to be used. If that's the case, please let me know down in the comments below. It's not that I'm like hell-bent on loving these. There's plenty of paints that I don't love, but I've been wrong before and I've missed the mark before. So if that's the case, I'd like to learn and be able to correct myself. So we're removing it from the blue painter's tape. And here is the finished field test. Everything's a little more pastel than I really would have liked. Fuumui's watercolors, at least in this style, are pretty expensive on their website. They cost about as much as they cost on Amazon, which is around $43, but they handle like way cheaper paints. I think I prefer regular Gensai and Paul Rubens Gucci Eye better than these. I also think I took so long field testing these because I really wanted them to prove me wrong, but in the end, they are not worth the price. Rather than the gray set, which I know is very tempting, I recommend the Boko Undo Japanesque set. And rather than the highly saturated set, I recommend Kuretake Gensai Tambi watercolors. The gray set is $42.99 on Amazon, and the high saturation set is $42.99 on their site, and I could not find it on Amazon. On the Fuumuui website, I'm seeing a few products that are pretty common on AliExpress and are popular as white labeling options, including a paint palette that Superior used to manufacture. So I wonder if this is a rebrand or a remarket of Superior. They also have several other Superior products, not labeled as Superior, labeled as Fuumuui, but I recognize them, including the fan palette I talked about a while back, as well as the watch palette that I talked about a while back. The Earthy palette set, which I didn't see the first time I was on their site, seems like it would have been a better fit for me than the high saturation set I bought. But I'm still not really that satisfied with how these paints handle in general. And while the Earthy set would have been a better fit for how I paint, I still don't think I would have been happy with the quality of the paints. So let's talk about the pros and cons. We're gonna start on a good note. Fuumuui offers nice brushes. At least I've reviewed several of their brush sets and I like most of them. And the gray palette itself is a rather interesting take on a limited color, muted color palette, but I do think Boku Undo did it better. So what are the cons? These are expensive for what they are. Other companies do the same thing better for cheaper. This could just be a rebrand of Superior, but it may be less expensive elsewhere like AliExpress or through other branding. The paints seem like they would fade over time. Just some of these colors in this selection have that, like, these are a very dye-based color feel, and those tend to be light fugitive. So if you're painting something that you want to display or you want to have for a while, I would not recommend this set. I also wasn't happy with the color selection here, but I probably just bought the wrong palette. So what's my verdict on Fuumuui watercolors? And keep in mind, they make a lot of different watercolors, and I only reviewed one style today. And frankly, I'm only really interested in reviewing this one style because some of the other styles, I feel like I've reviewed them when they were Superior. So I would recommend skipping these palettes unless they are accessible and cheap where you live, as other brands just do it so much better. I don't think you're missing out. I promise. I know the gray set is probably giving you guys FOMO. One thing to point out, the Amazon and Fuumuui listings, both on Amazon and on their site, have been color graded so that they look more saturated than they actually are. You just don't get that kind of color variation from the set itself. It is much, much desaturated compared to what the photos are showing. So already the photos are, I would say, a smidgen deceptive in that regard. And I'll just reiterate that if you think you're missing out with this palette, the Sumikundo Solid Ink set, and that would be the Boku Undo Japanesque set. I am literally looking at it because it is right next to the Fuumuui set on my Amazon window that I pulled up, is $15.20. You get 6 colors, but the way these work, way watercolor kind of works, is you can water it down to get pastels, or you can add in white to get more pastel. So that 6 color set is going to give you better color variation. And you just need to add some white, or you just need to add some water. I've already reviewed that set. I was really impressed by it. I will link it down in the description for you guys. I'm just trying to save you guys some money on this one. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I was super curious about both of these sets, but in particular, the gray painting set. It looks very pretty on social media. It kept popping up in my ads, and it is a color palette that is definitely very appealing to me. Hopefully today's review scratched the itch for you guys, answered some questions for y'all, and helped you decide whether or not either of these palettes is a good fit for you. That's why I put them through so many tests, is I really wanted to give them the fairest shake possible, because honestly, I really did want to like them. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope it was helpful, useful, and informative. And I hope to see you guys again soon with another art supply review or tutorial. Have a wonderful day, guys. Bye.